and welcome to South2North, coming to you from Johannesburg. We are running out of places to bury it. It's getting too toxic to burn it, and we're not even good at recycling it. Yet it's a huge part of our lives. If you're poor, you may have to live with it. If you're lucky enough to be well off, you'll pay other people to get rid of it for you. Yes, I'm talking about waste, our junk, garbage, trash, whatever you want to call it. And it's becoming a huge problem for all of us wherever we live. If we don't do something about it, we risk sinking into our own waste. Today on the show, we have waste sector specialist Melanie Sampson explaining the expansion of waste pickers all over the world, and environmental capitalist Jason Drew on how he's turned biodegradable waste into high-protein animal feed. But first, I'd like to welcome Cecilia Njenga, the head of the United Nations Environmental Program in Pretoria, who can give us a better idea of the current state of waste management around the world. Welcome, Cecilia. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
The United Nations Environmental Program works with all levels of waste management. Is this something that we need to be concerned about?
Waste management is increasingly becoming one of the greatest challenges, particularly for a highly urbanizing world. We know that 60% of the entire world population in the next few years will be living in urban areas. We do also know that a lot of the waste that is generated is basically, and we are talking about organic waste here, is basically generated in our urban areas. In most of our cities, particularly in Africa, we are increasingly seeing municipalities not having the capacity to manage this waste. A lot of the waste is being strewn along the roadsides. We are seeing it in dump sites. We are seeing health effects of this waste affecting our children here in Africa, as well as we are seeing increasingly particularly clean water being affected by the seepage of pollutants.
Should we be concerned, Cecilia, about the amount of waste generated as a result of urbanization and many other factors, including heightened economic activity? Is it the amount or the management thereof?
It's a two-way thing. As countries industrialize, there are technologies now, there is human capacity and technologies that are being introduced for cleaner production. So on the industrial side, there are opportunities to have much more cleaner production.
It would seem that some African countries are actually the dumping ground for toxic waste from increased industrialization and other parts of the world.
That's very true. Increasingly, we are seeing, particularly the whole issue, electronic waste particularly, seeing a lot of it landing in Africa, and we having no capacity here in Africa to deal with it and in how to dispose of it.
Are we getting money in exchange for being a dumping ground?
I believe we are not. I don't think we are getting money, but we are being attracted by the way development is growing to be attracted to these kind of goods, whether you're talking about motor vehicles, whether you're talking about electronic goods, mobile phones. I mean, a lot of us here in Africa now, the uptake of mobile phones has been, very, very, too much. A lot of people have 2 to 3 mobile telephones, 3 to 4 chargers, a lot of times just lying around and not knowing how to dispose this.
And we don't think of it as waste.
It's
just something that's just lying around in your drawer. We need a paradigm shift, obviously.
We definitely do need a paradigm shift, because as soon as we start seeing our waste disposal sites being choked by these electronic wastes and the toxic effects that these has on ourselves and our bodies, we will have to wake up, and we don't really have to wait for that
What are the
moment.
Implications of not waking up and taking waste management and the presence of waste as urgently as we need to take it?
We need to take some urgent action. It will have extremely harmful effects, not to us as human beings. It will have harmful effects. It will affect our water quality. It will affect the food quality, etc. So it really has a wholesome effect if we don't take cognizance of the fact right now. For instance, in Copenhagen, that's in Denmark, only 3% of the waste gets into their dumping yards. They are able to deal with their waste in a very efficient manner and ensure that they allocate very small land for landfill. They don't need the landfills.
For a poorer nation, perhaps the concerns are about creating jobs and feeding your children, taking them to school. But this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So obviously we challenge to think of waste differently. New industries can grow out of that. What are your thoughts?
Yes, indeed. The waste sector globally is a multi-million-dollar sector. And the countries and entrepreneurs who have found, a way in it, and they're making millions of money around it. Around Africa, in the countries particularly where I have worked, I have seen small-scale entrepreneurship, innovations taking place. We have seen people transforming waste paper into poles that they can use for fencing, etc. So we are seeing some incremental entrepreneurship spirit building around the whole area of waste around Africa. We are also seeing a lot of other bigger initiatives like waste to energy, where you're able to transform the waste into an energy source that you can feed into the grid or supply your plant or supply a certain community. So it's indeed, there are great opportunities around waste.
I was astounded, and I mean, we are trying to challenge families, to challenge all of us to think differently about waste, the waste that we generate in our own homes. I was astounded when I read that at least 1/3 of the world's food production, perfectly edible food, goes to waste. I mean, how do we justify that in a world that is so full of hungry and poor people?
It's difficult to actually justify. When again, the other side of the coin, we are technologically innovating. So we do have the technology that would also allow us not to waste. But we are looking at the entire food supply chain at the moment, and we are seeing tremendous waste. For Africa, actually for us, is about food loss. A lot of the waste we have is not really at the consumer side, because we are seeing the food waste for an average African person or person from Asia, Southeast Asia, is 9 to 11 kilos per person per year, whereas in the north is about 95 to 100 kilograms of wasted food per year. For Africa, a lot of our food loss is happening at the planting stage. A lot of our crops are attacked by insects or other creatures, and therefore, what you plant is not what you sow. And therefore, a lot of, during harvesting, the technology perhaps we use for harvesting causes a lot of waste. During storage, the technologies that we are using are rudimentary, and therefore, at the end of 1 month or 2 months, you can go back to your storage and find that the food has rotted or etc. So a lot of the food waste that's happening in Africa is really during the production stage. And in the northern part of our world, a lot of food waste is happening really at the retailer and at the consumer. I mean, let's take, for instance, all the food is being labeled expiring by the 10th of June. As soon as you see that date, and it is the 8th of June, you throw it away.
I'm actually sitting here cringing because that's exactly what I do in my home as well. You see the expiry date and you think, should I, shouldn't I? You try to smell the food. It hasn't gone off, but because the date says something else, you're throwing it away. That is waste.
Exactly. Let's not look at the color.
I read somewhere that the concern for the world is how beautiful the food is and the aesthetics of it all, but waste should be the fundamental concern. Well, our next guest feels very strongly about changing attitudes. She's going to tell us more about it. Dr. Melanie Sampson examines how societies informally deal with waste. She's the Africa Waste Sector Specialist for an NGO called WAGO, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Public Affairs Research Institute. Welcome, Melanie. Welcome. Have a seat. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Melanie, let's start with our definitions. They're called waste pickers, but I understand you prefer the term reclaimers. Tell me about that.
Well, in English, many policymakers and movements of people who do this work around the world call themselves waste pickers. But the naming of people who do this work is a political issue. In Brazil, the people who do this work call themselves collectors of reusable and recyclable material. In most of Spanish-speaking Latin America, they call themselves recyclers. And the reason why they've chosen these terms is because they want to emphasize that they're not just picking through waste. They are searching for valuable materials, and they're actually retrieving things of value from the waste.
How do they avoid the stigma associated with their work, where they're even regarded as scavengers?
So the stigma is something that can't be avoided. It's something that has to be confronted. Virtually every society has some kind of taboo about dealing with waste and dirt. And people who take on this work have to confront that. They also have to confront it within themselves. I've spent a year working with reclaimers on a garbage dump in Soweto. And one of the things I spent a lot of time talking to them about is, what does it mean to become a reclaimer? And these are people, many of them are very well educated, but who have either been pushed out of formal employment or can't find a job because of the massive levels of unemployment in South Africa and across the developing world. And so many of them heard that you could make money on a garbage dump, and they came. But at first they were repulsed. They thought, I don't want to be someone who goes through garbage. But as they came back day after day, they saw how much money people were making and the valuable work that they were doing. So reclaimers need to confront these internalized attitudes within themselves. And then importantly, they need to confront them in society and with policymakers. And there have been some very innovative ways of doing this. In Belo Horizonte, Brazil, there's a very progressive municipal waste management department that more than 20 years ago formed a social mobilization unit. They realized that waste isn't just a technical issue, it's a social, cultural, political, and economic issue as well. And so instead of having a waste management department staffed solely by technicians and engineers, they hired sociologists, anthropologists, social workers, who began a program to work with the collectors of recyclable materials. And they began things such as waste and citizenship forums in Belo Horizonte and at state and national level in Brazil, where they bring together people who do this work with residents in order to educate the resident.
I think this challenges our own attitude towards waste, because often it's something that we don't want to deal with. But if we can see the new industries that come out of it, the innovation, the creativity, it also serves as not just validating the reclaimers or the waste pickers, but educating societies, the producers of waste themselves.
Absolutely, and I like the fact that you're talking about changing our own attitudes, because really I find it quite ironic that we as residents discriminate against the people who go through the rubbish, and we're repulsed that they will go through our waste instead of being repulsed with ourselves for producing so much waste.
With Africa being a continent that has the most poverty, the highest levels of unemployment, are we exploring this area of work enough? Are we doing enough to make them part of the mainstream economy and also create opportunities for those who are unemployed?
Historically, as governments and municipalities in Africa have begun to try to adopt formal recycling programs, they've looked to the Netherlands, they've looked to advanced European economies and have tried to import models from there. And these have proven to be completely inappropriate socially and in terms of achieving recycling goals. So for example, in Cairo, which had one of the highest recycling rates in the world, it was reaching 80%, completely through the work of informal Zabaleen waste collectors. When the municipality finally decided to adopt a formal recycling program, instead of creating contracts with the people who were already doing the work and had been doing so for decades, they gave contracts to private companies. And whereas the recycling rate was around 80%, they only required the private companies to recycle 20% of the waste. And these companies were then completely incapable of actually providing the service because they were working in a way that was at odds with a system that already existed.
Sure, I think we're all challenged. I'm feeling very challenged at the moment. I'm never going to look at waste in the same way. And there is our next guest who doesn't look at waste the same way. My next guest, Jason Drew, describes himself as an environmental capitalist. He's found a way to turn organic waste into high-protein feed for animals. His company, Agri-Protein, won the African Prize for Innovation for their outstanding work in reinventing waste. Take a look at this.
A third of all the fish we take out of our seas is ground up and made into fish meal that goes into our industrial agricultural processes. We should leave the fish in the sea to be eaten by humans, not by farm animals. Our business is called Agri-Protein. What we make is something called mag meal. We take what other people consider to be waste that is full of useful nutrients, and we recycle those using the eggs of flies. Those eggs of flies grow into larvae, little wriggly things, and we dry those and we feed them to animals like chickens and fish. It's what they'd naturally eat. So what we're doing is simply recreating a natural process.
All right, I'm curious to know what you thought about that. But Jason, welcome. We just saw those flies in the video. It does look a little bit gross, but explain the process by which you turn waste into protein animal feed.
Well, firstly, flies and larvae have been a natural feed for chickens and for fish in the wild since flies were invented some 40 million years ago. So they've always been part of the food chain. That's why a trout leaps out of a stream is to get a fly. So what we do is we effectively breed those larvae out of waste. So in its very simplest form, a factory would be an immense cage of flies. We then teach those flies to lay their eggs in one place. We take the eggs out of the cage, we mix those eggs with waste from several different resources. Might be food waste, might be blood and guts from an abattoir, might be manure from a pig farm, and we mix that waste with the eggs. And at the end of the process, at the end of the conveyor belt, you're left with little wriggly larvae. And we then dry those, mill them, and we produce what we call mag meal. Now, what we did in Western terms is when we created immense animal farms, immense aquaculture farms, immense chicken farms, is that we went for the nearest available source of protein. And that, of course, was the fish in our seas. So we spent the last 30 or 40 years raping our seas to the point where most seas are on the point of collapse. And what we're doing with our process is giving back those animals in industrial agriculture the natural food they should have, and we're making this from waste that would otherwise go to landfill.
Sounds very basic, but is it a new way then of farming?
Well, it's not new to Mother Nature. She's been doing it for 40 million years. Flies are actually much maligned and mistreated. They're actually essential to the environment. They break down waste, they disinfect a dying carcass of a leopard on the veldt. That's what they do, the larvae disinfect. Now, that's how useful flies are, but most of us humans have just spent 10,000 years trying to swat them.
Of course, of course. And I'm thinking if you're not working in this industry, you're not a biologist, a scientist, a fly is just something to get rid of. And it's associated with dirt and unhygienic habits. But what we saw, thousands of flies in a cage, is that hygienic?
Well, we keep them in sterile conditions. They only get human-grade food, because that's our breeding stock. They're very important to us. So each of those female flies will lay between 750 and 1,000 eggs. And we want our flies to be happy and buzzing around. Buzzing in F minor, by the way. I know a lot about flies these days. And we want them to lay lots of eggs. And then we want those eggs to do what they do in the wild, in nature, which is disinfect, clean up the waste source, and turn it back into a usable protein.
But bringing this back, Jason, to everyday use, is it expensive? Do we need out-of-this-world technology in order to manage all of this?
No, we've created small home units for people to use at home. So if you've got a few chickens in a rural setting in Africa, or indeed in a large garden in a town, you can put some of your waste food in there. The larvae will come out of that process, a very small unit. Then it can either be to feed wild birds or to feed a few chickens that you have at home. However, what we're really dealing with is what we were talking about earlier, is massive urban situations where there's huge amounts of waste that can't be dealt with on a small scale. And the other side of it, our customers want huge amounts of protein. And so only when we can match huge amounts of waste with huge amounts of flies do we get huge amounts of output, which is helping save the seas, cleaning up our landfill, and making us a profit.
Celia, I want to bring you in here. I mean, you talked about rudimentary systems, particularly in Africa, that are causing the waste. And linking this to what Jason is saying, is it expensive? Is waste management an expensive exercise? Do we need technology that's going to cost us a lot of money?
Well, I think as Jason has said, and as I said, yes, we are applying to some level some rudimentary technologies or techniques to recycle our waste or to transform it to some usable material. But indeed, we are increasingly seeing examples such as Jason's, which are really practical. I mean, to be able to generate larvae from flies. I mean, that's something it's a natural productive process. It's a natural food cycle process that can be utilized. And I think we need to find ways of getting these examples of initiatives and innovations that are happening with very little, he said you're able to do it at the household level. If you have a few chickens or even in the rural area, if you have a bigger enterprise, trying to see how such innovations can reach to the levels of people the waste pickers that want to do something about their situation.
And Dr. You want to come in there, Dr.
I'd love
Samson,
to jump in there because I'd like to give you some examples. Municipalities around the world are currently adopting very expensive models for dealing with waste management. They're going for high-tech sorting systems, material recovery facilities, and waste-to-energy plants on landfills. And these cost millions of dollars and have been proven to be very financially unsustainable, particularly with the crash in the carbon finance market. And there are examples of municipalities around the world that have gone a low-tech, high labor-intensive route that have been very successful. So for example, in Mumbai, in India, there's a system where waste pickers who are affiliated to an organization get contracts with companies and with different areas of the city to collect their waste. They sell the recyclables, they take the organics, and instead of sending them to landfills to be buried, they have biodigesters that are located within those sites themselves that produce composts that can be used and also produce energy that can be used for electricity and to generate heat.
Jason, you received as part of your prize about $100,000 US. How far will this go in developing sustainability for your product?
Well, I think it's very important for us in two ways. Firstly, I think we were very privileged to be amongst 900 other innovative ideas from right across Africa. The prize should have perhaps gone to the flies because they do all the hard work, not us. But it's enabling us to roll out our low-cost domestic units. We're very much focused on the large-scale stuff because we want to tackle landfill issues, we want to tackle large producers of food. But this is a technology that everybody should get involved with. And so with that prize money, we are further developing our domestic and small-scale kit and looking for ways to get that out into the marketplace in Africa so that we can all get recycling our nutrients. Everyone takes it for granted today that we should recycle our tin, our plastic, our glass. Within 15 years from now, you will consider it absolutely normal to recycle your waste nutrients.
I also read somewhere that it takes just as many resources to make the edible bits of chicken as it does to make the parts that we throw away. So a lot of resources going into producing the waste that we in turn throw away as well.
There's no such thing as a way in nature. You know, nature recycles everything. It's only us humans that muck up the process. And we need to get back towards nature. Look at waste rather as an opportunity, as a natural resource. And when we start to view it in that way, we'll move to a much more circular economy as businesses and individuals, where we can do away with this notion of waste and get into the notion of how do we create a sustainable future for everyone.
Are you talking about the green economy?
It's not green, it's just the only way. There is no green. The Industrial Revolution is over. The sustainability revolution has started. And you either need to get on the bandwagon or fail.
As far as the waste pickers are concerned, is it hygienic? I was thinking about that because as we drive around, we the middle class, we're driving around, going to work, and you see people going through your garbage, looking for the plastic, looking for whatever it is that they want to recycle. How do we protect the waste pickers so that they've got their dignity and their hygienic needs are taken care of?
Well, I think there's a number of things that we can do. First of all, we do need to move away from waste pickers working on landfills and going through waste that has been mixed and disposed of in a landfill. We need to have separation at source programs where residents divide their own waste into different categories so that the materials, the compostable materials, the organics, and the recyclables are separated out from the general waste stream so that waste pickers can access those in a hygienic way. We also need to provide waste pickers with proper equipment and with health and safety equipment. Currently in India, there's a very fantastic campaign that the KKPKP trade union is running where they have been trying to engage the companies that make sanitary pads, engage in extended producer responsibility, because they say, you produce these pads and then people dispose of them, but when they dispose of them in their bins, we have to come into contact with these used sanitary pads, with used nappies. And because the companies have been refusing to engage with the waste pickers, they started a campaign where they collected all of the used sanitary pads that they came across and they dumped them
we all started smiling and sitting back because we knew you were going to say that.
in front of the companies. And I think these are the kinds of things that we as residents can take responsibility for. We need to be conscious of how we dispose of our waste. If you live in a part of the city that has separation at source, you must participate in it. If you live in a part of the city that doesn't have separation at source, surely every waste day you see waste pickers coming through your bins. Go out and talk to them. Get to know them. Find out who they are. Find out what they're collecting. Separate out those materials for them and begin separation at source yourself. And you will also be bridging a social gap because these people, as I say, are providing a service to you, and it's a service of great monetary value.
Well, I am sufficiently challenged and I will never look at a fly the same way, Jason, I promise you. Thank you very much, Jason Drew, for joining us on South to North. Dr. Melanie Sampson, it was a pleasure to have you with us. And of course, Cecilia Njenga, thanks indeed for joining us on the program. Thanks for joining me on South to North. Remember, you can tweet your questions, comments and opinions to @AJ South to North or find us on Facebook. Thank you for watching. See you next week. Bye-bye.